Hello, everyone. Good to see you. My name is Shamoon Siddiqui. I'm the Chief Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Officer at the Upbound Group, which is a parent company for Rent-A-Center. So that last panel was excellent. Where is Pat Benoit? Yes, thank you. Great job and excellent panel. Hopefully, we can make this just as entertaining and informational. So Robin, as always, wherever you are, thank you very much for putting together another amazing event. Hey Robin, thank you. Okay. And, I want to thank Zerto and Phosphorus for sponsoring this panel. Thank you. That's you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. So outstanding panel, and let them introduce themselves in a moment. The topic of conversation tonight is risk to data security and privacy due to the increasing use of AI. So as you all know, Gen AI and LLMs have become an imperative for most companies. Some in the industry are claiming that it's a bubble. I don't know how many of you have read the Goldman Sachs report, which was very disappointing to me. But then there are other people like me who feel that this is the most revolutionary development of our lifetimes. It's going to change the very way we operate and do business. So regardless, the race is on with companies embarking on ambitious multi-million-dollar efforts to use Gen AI LLMs for business use cases. And I don't know, my company is leading the charge on using Gen AI for demand forecasting, inventory management, search and browse function, conversational chatbots. I think these are the typical business applications that companies are adopting. On the cybersecurity side, I think we'll hear from our esteemed panel on what some of the leading use cases are. As enterprises are racing to adopt these technologies, the regulatory authorities are also racing to create and implement frameworks for the fair, transparent, and ethical use of these technologies. As always, the European Union has taken the lead with their EU AI bill. On the domestic front, we've got the NIST AI RMF, Risk Management Framework, and we've also got the White House AI Bill of Rights. All of these have a lot in common. They share common elements and themes that reflect a unified approach to ensuring the ethical, safe, and responsible deployment of AI systems. I would highly recommend to all of you that if you haven't, take a look at these frameworks because they'll provide the guiding principles and constraints over the course of the coming years. They are pretty onerous documents, so use ChatGPT to have them summarized, and that's what I did. So in today's panel, we'll get some practical insights from these leaders who are on the stage. As always, we want this to be a bi-directional conversation. I'm not going to ask the same question of every panelist. We have had this conversation, and I've directed questions to each one of these amazing people. So if you feel you need some clarifications or have a point of view, immediately raise your hand, interrupt. I will bring the mic to you, okay? I'm not letting go of this mic, so I'll bring it to you, and you can ask the question. All right, so let's start. Have the panel introduce themselves, and then we'll launch it. Sir, go ahead.
I thought you weren't going to.
I wasn't going to.
Oh.
You let it go.
Good evening, everyone. Mike Anderson. I serve as Deputy CTO and CISO for Dallas Independent School District.
Hi, Louis Mann. It's as security leaders, we're often viewed as the Department of No, right? We're a cost center, we slow things down, and I've spent my career trying to enable business through security. In the terms of AI at Michaels, I delivered search-based, AI-based search, recommendation, and emotion recognition. And I'm currently at Conchator helping small startups deliver their cutting-edge AI algorithms. And in that, security plays a critical role. So I really believe that security practitioners can play a critical role in the adoption of security of AI.
I'm John Terrell. I'm the CISO at Phosphorus. Before this, I was the CISO for Point72, where my boss decided to buy the Mets. And while we went through the whole GameStop thing, there's no one crazier than Mets fans. So. Before that, I was also the first and last CISO of Fox News during the Trump administration, and that's why I drink as much as I do.
Does anyone remember the Star Wars pre-sales failure of 2015?
Yeah.
When every movie website went down, well, I got to fix that problem the next year for Avengers, where we created an online queuing system for you to go wait in line online to buy your pre-sales tickets. So I feel like that's a little bit better than Fox News. But
So you were,
I was with ArcLight Cinemas, which is a boutique firm in Southern California. Today, I am Vice President of Strategy and Architecture at McKesson, so I am representing healthcare to this conversation.
Good to have you guys. So since you were so funny, I'm going to ask the first question of you.
that's not gonna go well.
Well, AI has become a common buzzword, right? Everybody's talking about AI. So how are you thinking about AI? And in your mind, in your experience, is the benefit greater for attackers right now or for us defenders?
Oh, 100% attackers. So phishing training is over. We failed. Like the mistyping, oh, that doesn't look right, it's a little off. Yeah, no, that's over. Your users should stop worrying about that. If clicking on a link is the end of your infrastructure, that's game over. Like we have failed at that, the attackers have won. And not for any other reason than what we just pushed out AI really fast. And those are the people that adopted the fastest. It's not good at a lot of things. It's good at some things, but it's not good at a lot of things. Things it's not good at, like correlation, finding unique patterns. Like these are things for security in the intelligence world. It's not finding those things for us. It's able to replicate what we've already learned and regurgitate that back to us and find those patterns that we've already found. So I think attackers have found those patterns and applied them really well to attacking us. And they're going to continue to do that really well. So we're going to have to find alternatives that aren't reliant.
I think of myself when I heard about Gen AI, my first impulse, as I'm sure was the case with all of you, was to use it as a Google search bar, right? We were asking Gen AI the same questions that we type in the Google bar. But the attackers were composing very realistic emails for phishing purposes. For years, we said, look for grammatical flaws, look for syntax errors. All of a sudden, that was a thing of the past. So very good point.
Well, so just to follow that up, I think we've had so many compromises over so many years where we've dropped the mail spools to so many companies. And I think what attackers have also learned, and this is kind of a behavioral psychology thing, is how absolutely terrible executives are at people that report them. And that you can start to see it, and I'm not sure that we've seen a chatbot that does this yet, but we're like, oh, you can be curt and terrible to people that report to you and they just do what you say. I think that's a little bit on us, and we kind of can reflect on that, but like, it's kind of a learning moment when you're like, oh, we're kind of terrible to each other, which is why you can demand at 7:30 a.m. that they send a wire transfer, because you decided that your Yahoo email was the only that you can access as the CFO of a multinational corporation, which is totally a thing that it's happening.
Amazing. Hey, Michael, so these systems are storing confidential information, right? What do you think in your mind? Are there very specific risks to these AI systems, especially when they're storing sensitive information like PII?
Yeah, most certainly there are. You know, I try in my work to keep this as simple as possible because I've got to talk to a variety of people being in an ISD to include government and the like. So it's still for me, in my heart and mind, the basics, right? You still have to do the basics incredibly well because whether it's, you know, some sort of authentication issue, whether it's a CVE, whether it's insider threat, all of those common things that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis are still applicable to these environments. But I do submit that they have some unique characteristics in that, you know, there are smaller micro versions, if you will, of cross-site scripting where, you know, there's these attacks taking place against these MLL engines, and they are really, really difficult for us to be able to detect for us to be able to guard against. And so it's like we really need, and I think Robert hit on this with respect to staffing, we need different resources to be able to really understand how that goes. And when you think about poisoning, this is a really bad problem. We already see this in the press, and we're early stage in this whole thing. We're just really 2 years into this. So as we sort of think about the future and where we're going, it's going to require us as practitioners to think about this thing differently. And the young lady from Pepsi, us really having an alignment with the business and understanding those business workflows, so we really gain an entire understanding of the landscape is going to be critical.
Great. Yes.
We talk about the business, and the thing that I'm fighting is that we want efficacy, we want what's being promised. The goose is laying the golden egg. The thing that I'm having to have conversations with is at what risk? So let's say we're doing an ophthalmic analysis and the efficacy is 82%. Is that good enough? How do you have those conversations to talk about risk or reward?
I don't necessarily, we're not at that point in our journey, so I might not be the person to talk through that. I'll let one of my colleagues share.
So I think our first approach as security practitioners is to approach it as a security problem. And you're going to come up with applying the typical controls that you do, access controls or anonymity or things like this. I think that with this new technology, we need different approaches, and I think that we need to back off and look at it more from an AI governance perspective rather than a security perspective. And when you break it down in that way, you're talking about more like the 3 lines of defense that we're all used to, right? So you're talking about strategy, risk, and security. So from the strategy perspective, you really want to get a cross-functional group together, and the importance of that is that you can actually have those conversations. So you've got to get stakeholders in regular meetings talking about the problems are and have them have skin in the game so that when you want to do something, you have backing to do it, and when there's friction, that you have support for it. So that's the approach I would suggest.
Thank you. I'll direct the next question to Tim. So Tim, we spoke about how regulatory authorities are racing to create frameworks for the ethical use of AI. Eventually, those frameworks will have applicability to different industries in a different, capacity. So in your mind, can you talk a little bit about which industries specifically are facing the strictest guidelines for the use of AI compared to the rest of the industry?
Yeah, so I mean, top of mind, healthcare, finance, social media, but I'll talk more about healthcare because we all have health problems. None of us have money, right? The reality of healthcare is there's already platforms like Google Health. Who has Google Health? Who has Fitbit? Who has Epic EHR? Who has some solution on your daily lives that gives information to some other healthcare platform? Those are already being transmitted by AI. And then the reality of those platforms is de-anonymizing information is very simple. Who's been online dating? Who's gotten a cell phone number of a potential date and then suddenly found out everything about that person by just their cell phone? There was a study by Harvard Business that 87% of the US population could be identified by their zip code, birth date, and gender. And if you de-anonymize information passed through AI, zip code, birth date, and gender, name irregardless, healthcare status irregardless, social security number irregardless, those 3 attributes, if they can be de-anonymized, it can be reassociated to you as a person. And I think that, at least in the healthcare sector, the thing we're concerned about is how can they reverse engineer that information to then figure out who you are, what you're doing, where you are in life. And that's something we look at. So in terms of the risks, de-anonymizing, re-identifying, and how do we combat them, we look at synthetic data, we look at pollution in the data, noise in the data, effectively taking real data, making it somewhat fake so that those elements can't be reestablished.
Good, and of course, I just want to add to it.
We've got a couple questions.
We have a lot. Rick?
I was just gonna say, I think some of that stuff like Fitbits and stuff like that is just regular like biometric data, so who really cares? I mean, some people probably do, but what I think about from, because I'm in healthcare also, and from a healthcare standpoint, is the liability of the organization. So when Microsoft states that they're great at security, then they just automatically turn on Copilot all over the place, and it takes hours and hours to try to, disable it. And anyways, another tangent there. But the problem is when we have caseworkers and doctors and stuff like that, and they start just putting stuff into a generative AI platform, not even realizing they're doing that, they're just asking questions, and that goes up into the learning model that we have no control over. And then at some point, they may even upload files and things like that. As a company, we're liable for that. So when that learning model gets breached at some point, which it will, all that stuff can come back to us and we're liable. So what do you guys' thoughts on how you're handling that within your organization too? I get it, like we should embrace it, we should just, this is utopia all over, we're gonna go paperless, which is, another just regurgitating things, but how are you guys handling that as far as trying to allow them to use AI and reduce the human error risk without putting your company at a liability situation?
Yeah, I think the position we've taken is risk responsibly. We've actually allowed GPT, we've allowed Bing, we've allowed Microsoft, with a disclaimer page that, hey, we have an internal resource to go use this technology, use it responsibly. Click continue to move to an external resource. Our position in terms of our public disclosures, we're doing X, Y, and Z to prevent and respond and be prepared to respond. And it's really a reasonable accommodation set of expectations. So prevention has not been our forefront. We've been enabling and allowing with that motto of risk responsibly and letting it happen. And as events occur and folks choose to upload certain data either to AI platforms or personal email platforms, we respond accordingly and take actions and notify, and we're just prepared to do so. We're prepared to do so in volumes.
Yeah, I've got a very different response. So, I think we're overthinking this problem, right? Like we're concerned about AI as a boogeyman that hasn't killed anybody yet. And that's not to say that it won't, but just a show of hands, who here thinks they have 90% of the assets on their network reasonably that they understand? And it's okay, all right, one. So we have one liar in the audience. And who here thinks that they've got a pretty good handle on the vulnerability management? Or that,
Yeah,
okay. And who here thinks that they understand what their network traffic's supposed to look like? And what the identities behind those people are supposed to look like? It's okay to admit that we're still playing catch up on the basics. I think we're too focused on the new shiny thing that is AI. And we're like, oh my God, hallucination attacks, and they're gonna start shoving all sorts of things in, and it's gonna turn into HAL 9000 with weird fetishes from 4chan. That's not gonna be a thing. Because we still can't back up our own infrastructure. Right? We're struggling to back up data, and then we can't reconstitute an AD forest when it goes out. Sure, I've got the directory, but it's going to take me 2 weeks to rebuild. I think somebody said they had 12,000 AD boxes. I was like, holy shit, that's going to take you a long time. If that's a CrowdStrike outage for your AD forest, that's going to take you a week.
You don't work
At
for Zero.
least.
You don't work for Zero.
Yeah.
Wrong company. Wrong company.
All right, sorry. I'm getting on a soapbox here. So that was not really the question, but
Risk responsibly. We've taken the approach we can't prevent.
Go ahead, Commissioner Collins.
Yeah, there you go.
That's all I have. Next question.
So, first we know about thinking point. So we're all talking about cybersecurity risks related to AI. I have a privacy hat on first. So, most of you might not have heard of Patagonia just got a class action lawsuit for the use of AI.
Did it
So-
predict that people weren't going to shower?
So it's a risk from a different angle, because it's not a risk from attacking of security threats, it's a risk of attacking from lawsuits. So Patagonia use a third-party customer care as a service. Most people here might be using outsourced customer service. Nearly all customer service tools use AI to route calls, to summarize the recording, to enable the customer service experience. Patagonia are getting a lawsuit, not under new modern AI laws, under California invasion of privacy. So what you need to think about under AI, the new risks, is old lawsuits, or excuse me, old laws. So, yeah, you're dying to.
Oh, yeah, I got another take on this too. So I think we've done a terrible job at trying to legislate security. I think we've focused on data and privacy, and I think the focus of that has been absolute hubris among our own legislature. Our data does not matter that much. It just doesn't. I think we've prioritized data over devices in many cases, like the devices that actually do stuff, that kind of jump that cyber physical like boundary. And I should disclose, I am talking my own book a little bit here. So, but I think we've done a terrible job. It's like, oh, we have disclosures, we have fines. We don't really have prescriptive ways or preventative notions of ways to stop it. We're just trying to say that we're going to come after you as though you've committed a crime. But that didn't prevent the problem. It didn't make us better at stopping it. And frankly, your data in most cases, I'm not going to say all, I get everybody wants their privacy to be theirs and be in control of it, but I'd be more concerned about a pacemaker going out. Or industrial control systems that all of a sudden don't have clean water. I really don't care that much about my data when I can't drink clean water. Like, I think we've done a poor job and we went the wrong direction because people said it was data security.
Yeah,
And-
but at the same time, as a retailer, as a, a B2C company,
Yeah, but
you're not going to
your
get
credit
lawsuits.
card numbers, you can't take credit cards.
Yeah, but you're going to get class action lawsuits. I hear
Yeah,
you
no,
know
but
the class
I'm
action.
not saying you won't get sued. I'm not saying that there isn't liability in the way that the laws are constructed. The law's wrong.
That's fair, but the laws are the laws, and lawsuits are lawsuits.
Yeah,
And when
except for
the attorneys-
that doesn't mean that people don't commit crimes all day long. People break new networks.
Hey, I've tried arguing that before. It doesn't work in court, by the way, that the laws are wrong.
I'm seeing some hands going up. I'm like, I have.
Okay, so another angle of the situation, okay, to maybe put it in another idea.
I also just want to preface this, can we give it up for Shimon? Because we've been drinking.
That's,
Way on the way, so.
So I'm not going to argue whether or not the laws are appropriate. The thing that I look at is, are there consequences when you have actually failed? And I always think back to the Equifax breach, right? You're talking about 320 million on average, US and Canada.
The whole of America.
The whole of America, pretty much. So if I remember correctly, they set aside something on the order of maybe, I forget what the number was, 70 million, whatever it was.
It was a lot of money.
It was a lot of money, but here's a catch. It wasn't a judgment. They set the money aside, and state attorneys general could sue, and that was the money that was there for that.
Right.
They set aside $40 million for customers to actually claim. Now, do the math, 300 million people, $40 million, yeah, you're getting bumps, right?
Right.
So I don't care about the laws. I think companies should be held accountable. AT&T, twice in the last 6 months, has lost tranches of data, massive tranches. Are there any consequences to that?
No,
So
there aren't.
So what's your point? So when you say that we got it wrong, what are you saying? So my friend here is from, is it Ireland? Yeah. So GDPR, I worked for Novartis,
Yeah.
Swiss company in 2018.
Sure.
We went through that whole preparation. The Europeans have a completely different opinion on my data and what can be done with it, how it can be disclosed. And oh, by the way, the discussion about security versus privacy, the C in security, confidentiality, is privacy. So I'm not sure why we're splitting hairs on the issue.
I'm not sure that we're splitting hairs. I'm saying that the legislation in the US is wrong. And that, like, we keep trying to say that you have to protect it and the only penalty is fines, but we're not doing anything to prevent it. Because, to your point, the cost of doing business, we will find our way out of it. It's cheaper to do the wrong thing. The reason Home Depot doesn't get the PCI compliance is because it's cheaper than having somebody do a Wi-Fi assessment of every single Home Depot.
If a company like AT&T is basically paying serious fines, they're talking $1 trillion, someone is going to hit their bottom line. The bean counter is going to say, now we're going to pay attention.
They've lost so much money on HBO Max. There's no amount of money you can find them.
All right, I think enough on this conversation. We'll get back in. I know this is very exciting, but I've got a whole bunch of mundane questions that I want to ask you. All right, I'm going to start with Wayne. So, yes, data privacy when deploying AI models. How can an organization, I mean, these are practical things, right? You're all going to deal with this, right? If you have an AI model that's processing sensitive information because you need to, what do you need to do to protect it? Just, prescriptive guidance for the audience here.
So let's say you actually want to be actionable.
Sure.
And then if you actually want to take an effort on something, or if that's what you get paid for, there are things you can do, in my opinion. So prescriptive things, again, what I said before about the governance, if you just talk about the security level, there's things you can do, access control, anonymization, privacy impact. I think some of those are some of the notes you wrote for me, thank you. But on top of that, you really want to think about it from a governance perspective. And again, you want to get stakeholders involved so that they have skin in the game and so that you can educate them as to what the issues are so that you can get the budget you need so you can take the actions you want. And then going down to the risk level, then you want to be able to identify what the real risks are. And I think that we jump far too ahead too quickly in security controls, like the ones I mentioned, because if you're deploying a predictive model, it's very different than the generative model. And if you're deploying something in a product like Michael's does, where you have far less access to the prompt engineering, than if you have a general web-based Gen AI algorithm, your threat is very different. If it's being used in accounting, that's very different than being used in financial projection. So, you really want to look at each application and from a security perspective, do a risk model and say, what do you really want to worry about? And what do you want to put your effort into? And I think that's a better approach. Also, as this next year, I think last year was the big year of the surprise of Gen AI. This is the year where 85% of CEOs have to have a Gen AI project because, otherwise their board's going to say, what are you doing, right? Half of those are going to be successful. So next year is going to be the year where you're going to see an ecosystem growing up to fill in the gaps of the different services that you need. A couple examples we want to think about. There's a startup that has a middle layer that tries to do filtering to see what are you asking. It does intent, figure out what you're asking and changing the prompt. I don't want to advertise for them, so I won't mention it. There's also another startup that's talking about having a vector database where you can train it as to what's sensitive. So when you get results back, it says, is there a hit in the database? It says, well, that's sensitive and either not providing the data or just giving it to the people that have access. So I think in the coming year, we're going to be seeing startups filling that in.
Excellent response. Thank you very much. Tim
Phelps.
Oh, sure. You want to follow?
Just a quick question around, so I was doing some research the other day, from a cybersecurity perspective, and the application development, they're saying that you can also inject code and things into generative AI. Do you guys know anything around that on how to prevent, so it's like cross-site scripting, but in your generative AI application, Copilot, for example. So what are the mitigating things that you can put around it? So not only are they gonna be putting your data in there potentially, how do you prevent a denial of service attack? What are the things that you should be looking for inside of the applications? Because now you're not only accessing the backend databases, can they wipe the backend databases? What are the things that you need to look for?
It really depends on, again, what kind of model you're, I mean, AI is not AI, not AI. You know, the driverless cars are very different than Gemini. And the implementation is very different. So you really need to think about that. What you're talking about is poisoning the learning model, and that can happen if your model is being trained. And the biggest examples of that is Gemini, OpenAI, and those kinds of things. But realistically, you're not poisoning your databases, you're poisoning the big AI customers' databases. So if you're deploying one yourself, you have to decide whether or not you're going to allow feedback to retrain it. And then you got to decide whether you want to do something like RAG, which is giving answers based upon a known database. And you wouldn't allow, if you were building that in your company, you wouldn't allow updates of those. So again, it really depends. It is a real issue, but it's not universal.
But that's the question of saying that people aren't really talking about that part they're talking about. Like, those are the things you should mitigate for. Nobody's talked about that piece. They're talking about all the scary parts and not here's what you need to do and what you should do. If your company's going to put in a generative AI, you're going to put in machine learning, there's no checklist of block this, turn that on, make sure they can't do this.
So there's some good frameworks out there that's starting out. The NIST AI framework, OWASP Top 10 AI, and ISO 4000 something is a new framework. Those will help.
And a whole lot of consultants out there making new livings.
Yes.
I just think we need to
Like
change the
myself.
conversation a bit to that instead of all of the scary stuff. Because
I
then
think,
it becomes less
yeah,
scary.
you're raising a really good point, but it's starting to happen. The OWASP top 10 LLM threats talks about this. The first one is input manipulation, right? And it talks about, it gives you examples of how input can be, you can go to a chat GPT and ask for the recipe of napalm, and it won't respond. It'll give you some benign answer that it's beyond there. But if you cleverly craft the thing that, okay, how do I make a cake? How do I do this? And then you insert napalm in there, the system gets fooled. And it gives you the recipe. We say, give me the recipe for this kind of a cake, give me the recipe for this pastry. And then the third one is give me the recipe for napalm. And it will dutifully spits out what you need. So there are these real things happening, and there is guidance out there on how you prevent and circumvent these things.
Hold on. All right, so we're trying to say that we're not talking about the scary stuff. I think what you're bringing up is supposed to be the scary stuff from an InfoSec standpoint. The fact that somebody can figure out how to make napalm and ChatGPT doesn't tell me, like, yeah, I don't care. You can find an Aaron Harkness cookbook for that. Like, that's not scary. The fact that you can pop a machine that's probably got access to all of the data in the entire company. I mean, like this is true of any kind of embedded language, any ability to have a sandbox escape. I mean, this is that class of bugs, but we're just doing it with human language rather than, you know, a set like programming language. So I think that should be a scary thing, and it's different only in that we tell these things to, you know, assume a different role. Assume you're a vulnerability researcher. Look at this line of code. This happens to be your code. What would a proper input be that exceeds this boundary? Like, that stuff should be a thing that we should be concerned about. But I think we're too concerned about exploiting that and just getting it to work. Like right now, OpenAI wrote us a bunch of questions for the original version of this talk, and they weren't very good. So we came up with these ones, and they're better, right? Like it's further down, but like we don't have great applications with this stuff yet. I think that's going to be a security problem. But I think we're trying to latch onto something way too new. Like we've not figured out how to get a lot of value out of it, and we're already finding ways to break it. Not a bad thing. We should find ways to break it, but we've just not found ways to get great value out of it yet.
All right, one question, and then we
Oh,
continue.
and Tim had a follow-up with it.
Sorry. Two sides, right? Regular infrastructure and development infrastructure. Has anyone been successful at tagging your data? Right?
Liar.
And has anyone been successful at managing the risks of third-party open source libraries?
I introduce vulnerabilities to my organization constantly.
And that's the thing, so your development teams who are embedding AI models are taking them from open source libraries. It's the same open source problem we've had forever. It's
It's much faster.
It's just much faster. It's different, they call them zoos versus libraries. And in your organization, tagging information from confidential to restricted to regulated to public, we've never been successful at that. And I think that to Heather's question, how do you actually choose what's omitted and what's included in your model? For us, we're trying hard on the classification through tagging. But how do you actually say what's omitted from your model and what's included?
Or
I think-
using AI to tag.
Or
When
using-
your AI tag breaks, then it breaks your whole picture.
Exactly, your AI tag suddenly tags you're restricted as public, and there you are. I think it goes back to the vulnerability conversation that you have to have a conversation with the reality of the information, the reality of what you're doing in your development practices. Are you using Log4j or are you using TensorFlow? Log4j and TensorFlow, one's a library, one's an Apache model that's been around forever. But we didn't really respect Log4j until we still didn't respect it until what, 3 Christmases ago?
Go ahead, ask your question.
So, just want to share a slightly different perspective, my experience with Gen AI. So I'm probably the most popular guy in the room. I'm an IT auditor. Doing some research.
First step on the road to
so
recovery.
I have about 10 auditors that work for me, and we've implemented a generative AI solution to write an audit observation. So not only do you get the indignity to get audited, you get a machine to write the observation.
Does that mean we can use AI to respond?
Sure, knock yourself out. But I tell you what, the results that we were getting were better than seasoned, certified, 10, 15-year experienced professionals were drafting. The quality of the draft was probably about 85% there.
So what I'm hearing is we need to lower the quality bar of what we find acceptable.
Well, maybe, I don't know, but the other scary thing is, and things to watch out for that I've learned from this, is we explicitly excluded certain parts of the data set and said, do not use this data. And then we found out later that it did. It ignored our explicit instructions not to look here.
Well, because it's an auditor.
So, and the other thing was that even though it was not a learning model, we had one case where we had severely incomplete data. And by severely, I mean, it was looking for probably about 8 or 9 statements. It had one statement, and it was able to generate a full-fledged, multi-paragraph observation from just one statement. So not to me, and being a technologist, to me, that's not scary. It's actually pretty impressive. So, I got just a slightly little bit different.
I think that's so I'm going to branch off and just ask Tim something along those lines that, we try to de-identify the data, we try to anonymize the data when we put it in these systems, but now with Gen AI spanning multiple devices and ecosystems, it's smart enough to re-identify the individual's identity, right? How is that being handled in the industry? What can somebody do to prevent that from happening? You can recognize that risk happening.
Yeah, I think we haven't had the opportunity to recognize it yet. There are folks out there who are mitigating it through synthetic data. They're taking real data and changing some of those key elements, birthday, gender, et cetera. That's happening. That's the real thing. That's been the last 5 to 10 years of these companies, IBM, Watson, et cetera. I think the interesting thing is what our friend here brought up around using AI in terms of customer support, where it's not necessarily something we've thought of in terms of data leakage or de-anonymization or re-identification, but it's those use cases of where are we using it and what consumer is thinking of it as a violation of their privacy. I think that's a very interesting point that was brought up earlier that maybe we didn't discuss far enough. Because the de-anonymization, you're always going to find elements that tie to each other that you can help infer populations of audience. But I think that was very interesting earlier around just perceived violation of privacy in a customer support situation. I think we should dig into that further.
So another way to think of your data sets from a company that's using a vendor that's B2B, the vendors are using it as I can't remember who said this, everything has to be AI. At what point is your internal data sets you're putting through that vendor intellectual property that's being used to improve their AI? So, in the example of I work with GameStop, our customer, we say completely anonymized customer set, is the GameStop customer profile. If our data set is used through an AI, profiles are then built on anonymous data, which you are now able to categorize what a likely customer of GameStop is. Well, if you're a vendor that's selling whatever tool, Zendesk to Walmart, hey, we're able to give you profiles of customers that can buy electronics.
This sounds like a really profitable product. I think people want this.
So here's
In fact, this is the argument for AI for a lot of people.
the B2B in your next conversations with your B2B vendors. How is your data being used from an intellectual property standpoint to train their AI models? Because that is the crux of one of the Patagonia lawsuits. This third-party agency is using personal data, but company data, to train an AI. So it's no longer the property of the consumer or the organization the consumer is dealing with. So you think of AI, how are we training it? What are we using, and what data are individuals or organizations giving up ownership of?
What's Google?
Tim, a quick response.
And what the contract?
Yeah, and I think that's a jump ahead into the audience because we've talked about using open source models, we talked about classification, we talked about potential training internal models, but I think the reality is we can do those things in traditional ways. We can do static scanning, we can do vulnerability scanning, we can do data protection, we can do encryption, we can do those things. That problem that he raised there is, I think, is something that's going to probably introduce itself in other organizations that maybe we haven't thought of yet. And I think that's potentially the solution. It's not solution, but the discussion that we leave here with.
Yeah, so I come out of an organization that healthcare data was our data, and we did analytics on it. But some of that was CMS data, which is licensed. If that CMS data went to another partner, we'd be out of business. And that's some of the risks we look at in data licensing, data aggregation, stuff like that. When you're AT&T, you can write the check. When you're a 5,000 person company, no, you write the check and close the doors. And that's part of the risk analysis there.
And you're exactly right, because you're exactly right, because I actually had that case with CMS data and the company's no longer in existence. We have to look to data privacy principles. And the principle is, for vendor risk management, it's your obligation, it's your responsibility if data you have goes somewhere else and gets misused. It's your problem, right? So you have to audit, and you have to investigate, and you have to verify that they're doing the things they're supposed to be doing. Those are the legal principles. Now, how you do it in practice is why I'm the lawyer, right? I don't know how to do it in practice. But those are the principles that we have to start with, and you're exactly right about the risk of that. I mean, that's what, in my AI counseling, those are the issues, that and uses in employment, that we deal with more than anything else.
So I'm going to pass this back to Michael because I think we can discuss this for a bit.
I think we're almost out of time. I do want to touch upon a couple of areas, just so that you walk away with the knowledge that these are of concern, and you think about it. We may get some answers from the panel right now, but one of the things I wanted to talk about was bias and discrimination. That's I think you spoke about input manipulation. One of the bigger concerns in AI is poisoning of the training data so that the bias and discrimination remain. And for environments like for healthcare industry, financial industry, government agencies, that bias can wreak havoc on the livelihood of individuals, right?
Or
So,
benefit,
huh?
or benefit.
Or benefit, yeah, it depends on which side of the coin you are, that's true. So these are concerns, and I wanted to ask Michael if there is a way to mitigate and protect the user privacy against bias and discrimination that might inadvertently or intentionally creep into the model.
Yeah, I think you talked about the training. The training most certainly is important. I'm gonna exercise
Yes.
brevity because it looks like we're almost out of time. Next to that are fairness models, right? We have to be very diligent about how all of this training takes place. And it can't be on autopilot. There has to be folks, well, probably not us, but people who are smart in AI, scientists maybe even, that, rally to put the proper controls around that so that we have a product, and after they've tested the snot out of it, we have a product that we can depend on, that we don't have the same sort of issues that we face today with respect to reliability.
Yeah, and I wrote some notes now that employing fairness metrics during model development to identify and address potential biases in the algorithms themselves. So there are technical, mathematical ways of preventing bias from creeping into the models. There are many other areas you all can look at. Since you've been so dominant, John,
Yeah.
I'll give you the last word and tell us about your thoughts around data poisoning and hallucination. Are those overblown concerns, or do you think those are?
Absolutely, they're overblown.
Okay.
I think in general, the AI topic it's not the problem yet. So to answer a different question, what you said about audits, with the ability that you could send back a single sentence and it gave you 9 more that were completely accurate. You know what that means? Yeah. Because our AIs are essentially autocomplete right now. That means that we're all finding the same audit problems. I think that's the bigger problem than the AI poisoning. We didn't poison that model. It's completely accurate. And it's coming back and we all have the same problem. I think we need to be going back to basics. Like getting good at the things that are hard because there's no easy button.
Yeah, but I beg to differ on the audit situation because if you go back to the banking situation, the auditors are, with the regulators, are finding companies and banks because of the discrimination.
Yeah, but,
So they're feeling it in their pocket
Oh.
and they're feeling it on the.
but the distinction of what he made is that every single thing coming back is correct, which means what it was trained on was the same problem everybody else is saying.
Right, but
It-
you can't just have it on autopilot.
I'm not saying it should be on autopilot. I think the interesting part about it is that it was able to describe a thing so accurately from a very basic statement because everybody else has that problem. It's not that people are getting audited and there's findings that these things are not impactful. It's that we're not fixing it.
We're not that
And we
unique.
all have the same problems.
We're not that unique.
Yeah, it turns out we're not. Our data
It
is
ain't
not that
rocket
unique.
science.
We can infer a whole lot about a whole lot of people on a very small amount of data. Because we're not that unique and we're not that special.
All right.
That's a great way to end, right?
Except for you.
We're not that special.
Except for you, John, you're special. You are special.
I am special.
One last thought from Wayne on. So I think all of us are really worried about whether AI is going to replace our jobs in the near future. So Wayne, your thoughts on if this is a realistic fear that our jobs will be impacted? And as a security professional, do you think you will have fewer people on your cybersecurity team or more?
So I wanted to tie it in with what a lot of people are talking about. The auditors, for example. So some of the case studies are done is that authors can write 30% faster with AI. Coders can code 30% more code. When you look at the skill sets that increase, what you find is that the lower skilled people get more benefit, the mid skilled people get middle, and the best skilled people don't get a lot of boost. So you get an equalization. But how do you know it's equalization? How do you know your audit was running? That's because you have somebody in your mix who understands the process and understands the outcome, who could decide whether it's working or not. So you don't want running in free flow with no guidance. What I think that what we're going to see, at least over the next 5 years, is that you're going to see increased productivity, which is why all the CEOs want to bring it in. But what that means is you're going to have a leveling and an increase of productivity, but you still need those experienced people on your staff to know when you're going down a rabbit hole and when you're not, and to be able to direct you in the same direction. The specific question is, I'm going to have fewer people on my team because you can't hire them. So what you're going to end up doing is being able to leverage a smaller team to perform more, is I think what's going to be happening, at least from a security perspective.
Beautifully stated, thank you.
Efficiency will also
Excellent.
cost jobs, and less efficiency and higher cost jobs.
Yeah. Go ahead, you have a question back there.
So, kind of getting back to the biases. So if a certain person asks a question, and then another person asks the same question, because of the questions that the first person has asked before, it's wanting certain responses. The next person will ask the exact same thing and get a different response because it learns, oh, this is this kind of a person. So then you're getting a bias based on who's asking the question, because AI is learning what kind of person this is.
So if you're using the models that you don't pay for, yes, that happens. If you're using an internal model that's using RAG, you'll always get the same answer. So again, it really depends on what you're doing, what you're trying to do, and how you implement it. So a lot of what we're talking about is OpenAI, Gemini, Copilot, and those kinds of things. And a lot of enterprises aren't going to implement on those.
Any final thoughts from someone, anyone? Oh, yes, go ahead. Did you have something?
No,
All right.
I think it's over to you to close off.
Yes, I think we've gone at a day that was like 13 cats, so. I, for one, am exhausted, so thank you very much. Hopefully this was educational for all of you all. We can continue the conversation after.